Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what is making the headlines with HuffPost UK's political editor, Kevin Schofield, and the Spectator's deputy political editor, Katy Balls. Welcome to both of you, with us until just before midnight. Front pages, though, let us start with The Guardian. Their headline, leadership battle leaves 8 Tory rivals scrapping for votes. According to the Financial Times, allies of Boris Johnson are poised to throw their weight behind whichever Conservative leadership candidate seems best placed to stop Rishi Sunak. To that end, the Express reports that many MPs believe Liz Truss fits that description the best. Indeed, the Eye suggests Mr Sunak is the man to beat. The Times says that he and Liz Truss are the 2 frontrunners in the race to become Prime Minister. The Telegraph highlights the former Chancellor's pledge to run the economy like Margaret Thatcher if he wins. But according to the Mail, party right-wingers are unhappy with what they describe as his socialist tax plans. Looking ahead to the extreme heat forecast for this weekend coming, the Metro proclaims Britain on red alert. Meanwhile, an investigation by the Daily Mirror has found that materials intended for recycling are being flown out of Britain to Turkey, where they are dumped and burned. The Star remarks on BBC presenters' salaries. New figures released today showed that Gary Lineker gets more than £1.3 million a year for hosting Match of the Day. And The Sun reports on an entirely different Boris, the tennis champion Mr Becker, who it's emerged is teaching sports science while serving a jail sentence. Well, a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. So let's return to our guests then, Kevin Schofield and Katy Balls, who are here with us. Katy, let's kick off with you. So then there were 8. What do you make of the list of contenders?
So it's still a pretty wide field, but I think we could see that shortened quite considerably tomorrow. I think that you could see when the threshold increase was announced that there was some relief. It was only at 20, but the fact you have to have 30 nominations by MPs to progress as of tomorrow does mean I think that's going to be quite a short-lived relief. In terms of the candidates lost, I think Sajid Javid is probably the biggest surprise. I think rival camps had tried to suggest to the former health secretary he'd be better rowing in behind a candidate, but he decided to go himself. And I think that is having repercussions in the sense that I don't think it's boosted his standing amongst colleagues. He'd probably been better to, I think, work with another candidate as opposed to go out for a third time to run for leader unsuccessfully.
And spare a thought for us then, Kevin, of those who've already dropped by the wayside. Priti Patel announcing she was not running. Raymond Chishti clearly did not have enough support, but also Grant Shapps and Sajid Javid right at the last minute before the deadline closed.
Yes, as Katy says, I think that was the big surprise. Sajid Javid, obviously high profile, got decent name recognition, probably one of the few in the race that the ordinary man or woman in the street would have heard of. So yeah, that would be a big disappointment for him. He only launched his campaign yesterday, so not to make it onto the ballot paper is a little bit embarrassing, actually. The others probably not as surprising that they've fallen by the wayside. But again, as Katy said, the big hurdle now is to get 30. Previous Tory elections have meant that basically the person that finishes bottom falls off the ballot. Well, they've raised the bar now so that you can finish bottom and also you can fall off if you don't hit 30. And that's quite a high bar to clear. And I think some of them who only just got past 20, maybe somebody like Jeremy Hunt, Nadine Zahawi, I think they might be looking pretty vulnerable tomorrow. So yeah, we're at 8 at the moment, but I think maybe by this time tomorrow we could be another 3 or 4 down, and then we move on to Thursday.
Yes, and The Guardian, talks about the rivals scrapping for votes. Sunak, the front runner, with support of more than 40 colleagues. Javid drops out. But of course, tomorrow will be a secret ballot, I guess. They don't need to say how they're going to vote, do they? The Financial Times as well. 8 make the Tory ballot as allies of Johnson step up a stop Rishi push. Will he be one of the final 2? What's your betting, Katy?
I think he's in a good place to be in the final 2. I think we've seen so many surprises in UK politics. You wouldn't want to bet everything on that happening. But it does seem right now that Rishi Sunak has plenty of momentum behind him. I think the fact that he was probably the first big name of the candidates to come out has helped him, and the numbers are much higher than the other camps. Now, I think tomorrow, as you say, when we actually see, because lots of MPs have not declared yet, yes, more than not have, but there's still, around over 100 who have not done that. So until we see tomorrow where MPs are, I think that's where we're going to have the clearest sense. But right now, definitely the sense amongst other leadership campaigns is about trying to get the spot in the final two opposite Rishi Sunak, which I think is what is helping some candidates like Liz Truss, who are pitching themselves as the figures who can stop Sunak from winning.
Yes, and indeed, the Daily Express picks up on that Boris loyalists have backed Liz Truss to stop Rishi. We saw Nadine Dorries, didn't we, and Jacob Rees-Mogg coming out, and the narrative was quite clear. It was Rishi's higher taxes, not collectively agreed by Cabinet and signed off by the Prime Minister. How do you see this battle shaping up? And why is it about tax and spend when there are many other issues to discuss, Kevin?
Yeah, well, I mean, traditionally, Conservatives love low taxes, and which is ironic, obviously, given that we've had a Conservative government for the last 12 years, and taxes are at their highest level in decades. So yeah, people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nadine Dorries, James Cleverly as well, who came out today to back Liz Truss, they are training their guns on Rishi Sunak, saying that he's made a mess of the economy, taxes are too high. He's not a proper Conservative. I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg, rather bizarrely, has described Rishi Sunak as a socialist, which is probably, that's a first time for everything. But yeah, they see this as Rishi Sunak's weakness, the high tax rates that we have in the country at the moment. And they think, obviously, that Tory members will agree and will be wooed by a candidate who pledges to reduce taxes and implement Brexit maybe in the way that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg would like to see it implemented. So I think that is going to be Rishi Sunak's great weakness in terms of getting his point across. However, what I'm sure we're going to come on to it in the Telegraph tomorrow, he talks about how, and he was saying it earlier today as well, actually, that tax cuts will come, he says. It's not a question of if, but when. However, he will only do it when the economy can afford it, whereas the others are saying let's cut taxes as soon as possible. So that, I think, is going to be the big ideological battle as the contest progresses. Yes,
responsibly was the word he used today, wasn't it, Katie? So let's take a look at the Daily Telegraph, shall we? Giving, they say, his first campaign interview, the former Chancellor likens Thatcher's upbringing above her father's grocery shop to his own childhood spent helping in his mother's pharmacy. Tell us more about how he's outlined how he might be Prime Minister in this article.
Yes, this is not the first of the Tory leadership hopefuls to compare themselves to Margaret Thatcher. You can think about Liz Truss and some of her recent photo ops. But Rishi Sunak is trying to use Thatcher as an example on the economy and effectively saying that he will cut taxes, but only responsible tax cuts. So it has to be done when the time is right. And I think this is interesting because one of Rishi Sunak's big weaknesses in the Tory leadership campaign is the fact that others around him are offering probably easier policies to sell in the form of immediate tax cuts, and he is having to chart probably a more unpopular course. But so far, actually, has somehow managed to shape the debate around him and go out on that, which means I think he looks less on the defensive in other circumstances. But I do think if Rishi Sunak does make it to the final two, he is going to have to, change gears and actually have a message which is hopeful and inspirational. It doesn't have to be on tax, but he needs something else to say other than that he is not going to cut taxes as quickly as others.
And also, being drawn into, the accusation of betrayal and disloyalty last week, suggesting that he left government because it was no longer working and paying tribute, in fact, to Boris Johnson. Kevin.
Yeah, that was quite eye-catching as well, what he was saying about Boris Johnson, because clearly he sees that as a weakness as well, regardless of the Prime Minister, the outgoing Prime Minister's unpopularity. I think there are still a lot of Conservative Party members who probably still have quite a lot of time for Boris Johnson, and Rishi Sunak sees that as a weakness. He doesn't want to be painted as the anti-Boris candidate, so he was very effusive in his praise, actually, of Boris Johnson today. Said he was he had a good heart, which rather begs the question: well, why did you leave his cabinet last week, saying basically that you could no longer serve under him? But yeah, he was trying today, I think, to sort of smooth the rough edges around his campaign in terms of tax cutting and his treatment of Boris Johnson, as we saw Jacob Rees-Mogg clearly in particular, and Nadine Dorries this evening. No, they're still pretty bruised, I think, by Boris Johnson losing his job. They blame Rishi Sunak, accuse him of plotting against him for the last few months. And he's obviously trying to, as I say, Rishi Sunak trying to get not lose anyway as many pro-Boris voters as he possibly can.
We talked last week, Katy, about how this is a sort of battle for the soul of the Conservative Party. And if it does shape down to Rishi Sunak on one side and a candidate of the right on the other, then what is Rishi Sunak in terms of historical Conservative candidacy?
Well, I think what's really striking is if you look at what could be a final two of Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, in which case Liz Truss would be seen as a candidate on the right. Yet Liz Truss voted Remain, Rishi Sunak voted Leave. Rishi Sunak is arguing to be a fiscal conservative, to be disciplined, and others in the race talking about more, or they're at least implying about borrowing to fund tax cuts. It's quite interesting where we got to in terms of who's on the right, who's in the centre ground. I think if you look at some of the backers Rishi Sunak has had, so former chancellors, Lamont, you also have, figures like William Hague. I think that Rishi Sunak is coming across more as the establishment figure in that final two. And actually, if there is a candidate on the right, I think they'll be seen as more radical by comparison.
So just looking ahead to tomorrow, the vote starts at 1:30. Who's going to, in your view, Kevin, who might be shaken out of the system tomorrow?
My goodness, my political predictions tend to blow up in my face. But as I said earlier, I think Jeremy Hunt and Nadeem Zahawi are probably looking quite vulnerable. It's going to be interesting to see which of Kemi Badenoch obviously is generating a lot of interest, a lot of buzz around her campaign. Suella Braverman as well has, I think, in the background saw off the potential challenge of Priti Patel to be seen as the Brexiteer Conservative with a very capital C candidate. I think they'll probably get through, but it's going to be very, very dicey. I think it's going to be a lot easier to predict who will definitely go through. People like, as we've talked about, Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, Penny Mordaunt, Tom Tugendhat. I think they're pretty much assured to go through. For the others, it's going to be a little bit interesting, pretty nervy a couple of hours for them, and once that result is announced shortly after 3:30 tomorrow. But I think we'll shed at least 3 tomorrow, and then by next Monday, when we have by Thursday, by the time we get to next Monday, I think we could be very close to getting down to the final 2.
Yeah, exactly. Just very quickly, Katy, you as well. Who do you think might go tomorrow?
Yeah, I broadly agree in the sense I think the candidates that appear to be struggling today, Nadeem Zahawi, Jeremy Hunt, and then I think if you're looking at the right of the party, it feels the endorsement of Nadine Dorries, Jacob Rees-Mogg has helped Liz Truss. So can both Suella Braverman and Kemi Badenoch both get 30? I would perhaps only one will be able to do that, and that could eventually help to unify the bloc on the right of the party to get their candidate, which could have been someone like Penny Mordaunt could struggle to get to the final 2.
Well, the 2 people who used to be newspaper reviewers like you two tonight have already gone. That is Raymond Shishti and Grant Shapps, who did it for a long time. In fact, they're already out of the competition, and we will certainly have full coverage of that tomorrow. Stay there, both of you. Lots more to talk about, including this heat. Does the record heat forecast for this weekend warrant a national state of emergency? Back with that next. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Kevin Schofield and Katy Balls. Welcome back to both of you. So it's hot and it's cooling down, but it's going to get hotter, isn't it, Kevin? Front page of the Metro, Britain on red alert, talking about the prospect of the hottest day ever in parts of the UK.
Yeah, for those of us who were brought up in Scotland, just like Katy, it's not been much fun being in London the last couple of days, and the idea that it's going to get even worse over the weekend is frankly terrifying. And obviously with this, it brings obvious problems, trains having to run more slowly, extra pressure on the NHS as people, particularly vulnerable people, older people, struggle in this heat. And, you know, anyone who doesn't think that climate change is an actual thing, maybe this might make them realise that perhaps it is after all. It is quite extraordinary, the intensity of the heat right now. And sadly, it's only going to get worse. And I think it's going to be a good while before we manage to get through this particular heat wave.
Yes, continent too. Certainly, you know, we sent to Portugal where there's a series of wildfires, but you mentioned the health service. Telegraph and elsewhere talking about the ambulance trusts on the highest alert over heat, but also COVID, Katy. Ambulance trusts declaring the highest state of alert, citing extreme pressure as this heat wave continues, suggesting that people are being urged to only call 999 if the matter is life-threatening. So very difficult pressures we're seeing.
Yes, completely. And if we're being honest, the country is just not used to being in the high 30s when it comes to the temperature. So if we do hit that, and we expect to dip before the weekend, but then go up again, people will perhaps have to adjust their behaviours, and therefore it's knowing when to call, when to do things. And it is going to put a strain on lots of services, and also just the general way we're going. I mean, I struggle even with the temperature of the past few days, let alone if it gets as high as being predicted when it comes to the weekend.
And pressure too at airports still. The FT talking about this Heathrow capping flight ticket sales throughout the summer, Kevin, 100,000 only, suggesting that 125,000 passengers left that airport a day before the pandemic. So once again, we're seeing some very disappointed travellers.
Absolutely, and there's already been obviously a lot of people affected by flight cancellations thus far in the summer. So the idea that it's going to get even worse is terrible, really. I mean, people who have saved up all year, we've had a very tough couple of years. Maybe they've not been abroad since before the pandemic, and now discovering that there are flights that they've already paid for in some cases aren't going to take off. It's just truly awful, and it doesn't look as though it's going to get better anytime soon. This is obviously a hangover from the pandemic. Airlines and airports laid off a lot of staff when global travel ground to a halt, and the aviation industry has taken off, if you pardon the pun, much more quickly post-pandemic than was expected, and they don't have the staff numbers to cope. So even the people who have been lucky enough to get away have faced awful delays in picking up their baggage when they get to their destinations. But at least they are getting away, whereas now it looks as though hundreds, if not thousands more people per day are going to be very, very let down by the fact that their flights aren't even going to take off, and they're left having to scramble around trying to make alternative arrangements. So yeah, it's going to be a pretty tough summer. And also, all this is obviously coming against the backdrop of a government which is in complete limbo. The government's really not able to do much until a new Prime Minister is in place, and that's not going to happen until the 5th of September. Yeah,
we'll see what else does not get tackled, shall we? You want to do The Sun as well. I'll just show it. Boris gets a new job. The fallen TV star, The Sun tells us, has landed himself a new job teaching fellow lags, as the paper puts it, sports science. So there we are. We will no doubt hear more about that a little later. But for now, Kevin Schofield, Katy Balls, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you. And we'll certainly see you throughout the next part of our programme. Next, though, we've got the weather.